But welcome everybody to the Readings from Oconomowaukee series with Books and Company and Boswell. We are so honored to welcome you. And for the actual introduction, as opposed to the pre-introduction, I give you Lisa Baudoin from Books and Company.
Hi, thank you, and welcome everybody. And welcome Nancy. Nancy Dunson is a native of Chicago's South Side, a graduate of Northwestern University and the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. She has worked for more than a decade as an Emmy-nominated, award-winning television journalist at CBS and ABC affiliates nationwide. She currently lives in downtown Chicago and manages brand communications for a large nonprofit, which sounds very interesting. Zakea Dalila Harris, author of The Other Black Girl, calls The Kindest Lie a winning portrait of circumstance, sacrifice, and forgiveness, rife with rich language, shocking revelations, and easy to fall into characters. The Kindest Lie is the kind of novel you feel in your bones, which for me was spot on. It really did sort of hit very close and felt, I don't know, it was just very deep on that level. So Nancy, it's so good to meet you tonight. I love the book. My booksellers have loved the book. We've talked a lot about it. So I'm excited to hear what we have to talk about tonight. You bring forward so many good things to talk about.
Oh, I'm excited. Thank you so much, Lisa and Daniel, for having me. I really appreciate it. You guys have been just showing me all the love, and I just appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to start by giving us a little synopsis of the story and read a little bit, get us sort of in the flow?
In the mood and the flow for the book. Of course, of course. So The Kindest Lie, it's a story of race, class, and family, set at the dawn of the Obama era. And it's a story of a woman named Ruth Tuttle. She's a very successful Ivy League educated Black engineer in Chicago. Everything is going her way. She's got this wonderful husband. They've just moved into this brand new townhome in Chicago, and she's got the great job. And so the world is really her oyster, but she's been harboring a big secret. And the secret is that she had a baby when she was just a teenager, and she walked away from her son and left him behind in the dying Indiana factory town where she grew up. And so now her husband is pressuring her. He's like, it's time to start a family, but she can't really do that until she makes peace with her past. And so she's been keeping this secret from him as well, by the way. And so she goes back to her hometown to search for her son. And when she gets there, that's when she forms this unlikely connection with this poor young white boy who's nicknamed Midnight. And then when the two of them come together, they're really just on this collision course of race and class that changes both of their lives and really puts in danger and risks the life of one person they're both growing to love. And so that's what the little synopsis of the book. And so I'm going to read just a very short excerpt here from the book from the first chapter. And just to set it up, I start the book on election night in 2008 when Obama was first elected president. And so Ruth and her husband Xavier are having this election night watch party where they're checking out the results. And so the announcers have just named Obama president. Her whole life, Ruth hadn't dared to believe this could happen, and she almost forgot to breathe. A picture of the little house where she grew up in Ganton came to mind, its low ceilings and narrow hallways. Mama at the kitchen table counting money on the first of the month. Papa's body quivering underneath his plant uniform as he tried to walk straight in the early days of his illness. Maybe, just maybe, everything they'd all been through had been for this, to get here, to this moment, to this man with the funny name, to this day in history. Xavier whooped and gave her a ball drop New Year's Eve style kiss. The townhouse vibrated with their jubilation. Guests lifted their glasses and their voices in a toast to their own manifest destiny. And out of the corner of her eye, she saw Harvey, who was usually the loudest in any room, rocking quietly in a chair with his folded hands pressed against his lips. Then they rolled up the living room rug to do stepper sets and slides, with Xavier breakdancing like he was 13 instead of 32. Somehow she needed to store every part of this moment, burn it into her being, so it would still be real when she lived it again as memory. She wanted to scoop up this feeling, bottle it, and tighten the cap so none could seep out ever. But at the same time, her instincts told her to share it. So she opened the windows to give the neighborhood a contact high.
Wow.
Yeah. So just a brief excerpt. Yeah,
What a moment.
that sets the stage. Yeah. And so many people remember where they were, at that moment on that day. I do have a funny story. Well, not so funny. It's kind of bad. I found out about a mistake I made in the book. I just learned this. I don't know if you guys know the author Melanie Benjamin.
Oh, sure.
Writes historical fiction. Yeah, so I was on a panel with her, and so you know how we are, behind in the whole green room before you go on backstage Zoom, and so she said, Nancy, where were you living at the time of the election night? And I told her I was actually in Florida because I was living in Florida at the time, even though I'm a Chicago native. And then she said, oh, I figured. She said, because I was in Chicago, and she said it didn't snow that day, and I had snow in the. I didn't reach the part, but I have it snowing in here. She said it was actually unseasonably warm. And I was like, oh no. So I've been like, oh my God, she was the only one to realize it or point it out to me. And I'm usually so into, researching every little detail, and the copy editors do too, but we missed that one. But
well, the thing is, of course, if you'd said it in New York, they would have known the weather.
They
would have. Yeah, we've had books over the years. We've had. I used to have this book that I used to complain about all the time when things are set in Wisconsin, especially, and they had somebody walking down the streets of Milwaukee and reciting the streets in the wrong order.
Oh, are you serious?
What I always say to people is like, if this, I honestly, everybody forgives you for the weather. I mean, nobody remembers except for the amazing Melanie Benjamin.
Yes.
But it does one of those things that I know why you try to research that, because it throws people off and they stop focusing on the story and thinking about.
They're starting to think about the details.
The details, and so that's why sometimes people will even. There was a book we liked called Mary Jane, where I said, where was that record store? And he said, oh, that record store didn't exist because none of the record stores at the time in Baltimore were in the correct neighborhood that I wanted to be in.
Oh, that's
so he just said, it's better to just make it up.
That's what I did with Ganton, which is where Ganton, Indiana, which is where most of the book is set. Right. Even though I've had interviews with folks who said they were Googling Ganton or trying to find it on a map. And so I felt like that was a great compliment because it felt authentic, I guess.
Oh, it does. I mean, I think we had even I obsessed, like, was it a real place? Did you grow up there? Was it, and, like, no, you grew up in Chicago. Well, and I think we had decided that it was kind of somewhere between a little South Bendy and maybe a little Kenosha-y. Because it's got to be
Kenosha. I used to work in Kenosha. Yep. So
because it's got to have had a plant. It had to be a factory town. And it also had to be more working, like that setting of working for. In terms of like agile. It's not Gary,
but a lot of people have thought Gary, Indiana.
Because it's so close in the name. It would have had to have been in like the 50s to be Gary, I think.
Yeah. And Gary is predominantly Black, now, so.
Right.
And this town is more racially mixed. And also I was basing it on Anderson, Indiana too.
Oh, Anderson.
I have an aunt and uncle there who worked at the Delco Remy GM plant.
Oh.
And it closed, and then so I saw some of what happened in that.
Oh, you saw it exactly. So it probably is. And I always thought of it as being a slightly larger town. But it's funny, but that's one of those weird things that we always say is like, you pass the book on and people are like, no, it's definitely Tulsa. And you're like, what?
Like, it's Tulsa? Okay. Right. And that's been the hard part. You give it up to the reader, and now it belongs to them, and they can, make their own inferences.
It's good to just accept that, because it's hard for some authors to accept that people can have their own interpretations of books. And sometimes you might actually not even know that you were writing truths into it that you didn't, like connections and things. I'm sure people have
true. There are things that people tell you and you're like, oh, really? You didn't make those connections. So.
Okay, but they were small towns close together, and that's such a Midwest thing. Yeah. So it really sets it. That's not a Oklahoma kind of thing, or a.
I didn't think it was told.
I know, but I mean, it's really so like, that was what was interesting about the story, is how the towns were so close and so different in flavor.
Yes.
Yeah.
so you had was it place that came first? Was it the situation? Was it the person? Was Ruth the origin of the story?
No. So the origin, so many people think that I came up with this idea during the Trump era, and after the murder of George Floyd, because it feels, in a way, essentially, it feels so timely.
It
with
was, yeah.
things that happened around the time of the release of the book last year, the hardcover release last year. And no, it was none of that. I started writing the book in Obama's second term, but I was always thinking about the events of 2008 with the election of Obama. I've always known, obviously, that racism exists, but I think with social media and Facebook being so new, I was just seeing this vitriol, this divide playing out, on Facebook, my social media feed. So that's something that I kept thinking about. And also just the historic nature of the Obama election was interesting to me just because it was a time of such great hope, and then you had people, some saying, oh, well, if we have a Black president, we're now, post-racial. And clearly that was not the case. And I think we see that with the administration we just had, I think the backlash, the response to having America's first Black president. But all that was interesting to me, the racial divide, this sense of hope with a Black president, yet so much despair, and division racially, but also economically, with the Great Recession. So I was just interested in telling, that kind of a story. And also, it was November of 2008 was a pivotal moment for me, just personally, because my father, he was diagnosed some months before that with lung cancer, stage 4 lung cancer. And I remember him being in the hospital in October of 2008. And he wasn't, very lucid. And the doctors that were trying to, they test your lucidity, they're like, oh, what's the day of the week? What month are we in? And the doctor asked my father, who's the president of the United States? And this was in October of 2008. And my father said, Barack Obama, in this croaky voice. And the doctor's like, not yet, not yet, and so I often say that, here's a man who, survived World War II and the Great Depression and all that. And he, he got to vote for America's first Black president, because I did convince him then when he was well enough in October to go out and vote early, because he was bedridden by election day, and then he died a few weeks after the election. So so that's just kind of a poignant, time for me too, with him, everything that he's, lived through, Jim Crow, and just all of the things he's seen in the world, to be able to cast that last vote of his life for our first Black president.
What a wonderful story.
Yeah.
What a sad story, but
right. But it's just, yeah. And it was just such a great time of hope, for my family, for so many, of course, in the Black community, but I think in so many communities, even if you weren't a Democrat, it didn't always matter. I think at that time, at least, I don't think it mattered as much, because people felt we had made progress.
Right.
We had, but we just weren't post-racial. And so I was interested in looking at that, the Black and white communities. And I will say this one change I made in the book, when I originally wrote the book, the first couple drafts, the character of Midnight, that poor young boy I talked about, he was Black in an earlier iteration of the book. Yeah, I had written him as Black. And then I thought, well, but I'm really trying to talk about this divide. And so it's going to be more interesting, I think, if I switch and try it out with him being white. And then it just opens up so much more story with his family as well.
Right.
And so I made that switch. But I had written the entire thing, or not the entire thing, but quite a bit of it with, Midnight being Black.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. There's a lot of wonderful and not so wonderful relationships in the book, but the one between Ernestine and Midnight's grandmother, whose name is, I wrote them all down.
No, Lena.
Lena, yeah, Lena.
Yeah.
Her
It's
story.
been a while since I've read it, because I don't go back and read it.
was very a warm friendship. That
yes.
Kind of those relationships really drive a lot of the warmth of the story.
Yeah. I really love the relationship between the two women, and a lot of that was because of their husbands. Both of their, husbands had worked at the plant together. Both of them are deceased now, but kind of brought people together. So it was like the plant brought them together, but then the plan also created divisions too, like especially when it closed, you know. I think you saw a lot of toxic masculinity
Right.
between, particularly between Eli, who's Ruth's brother,
Right.
who's Eli's black man, and Midnight's father,
Butch.
Butch Boyd. You know, you see a lot of that tension there. And that was the other thing. This book is set in 2008 at the time of the Great Recession. And I think when you have this financial strain, economic strain that people are under, it just seems to exacerbate the racial tensions. And I tried to show that between Eli and Butch.
Well, it's when things go bad that people start targeting
Yeah.
the other,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. It's kind of that race to zero, you know, like that, you know,
zero
if
sum.
you get more and you know, you and your kids get more, it's less for me and my kids. And that's kind of what they're dealing with.
So with Midnight, was he always a primary narrator, even when he was when he was first started as black? He was always a second. You said
Yeah,
that was always the way it was going to be.
that was always the way it was. But the other thing was I had 4 point of view characters. I did write the book, the entire book, with 4 POV characters, and then revised it because I thought, and the 4 POV characters were Ruth and Midnight, who are now the POV point of view characters. And then I also had Mama, who is Ruth's grandmother, who's pivotal in the story, and Eli, Ruth's brother. So I had all 4 of their perspectives. But as you guys both know, you know, when I started querying literary agents, you know, I started getting rejections and hearing that the story was just too dispersed and I'm telling too many stories. It's kind of all over the place with all those points of view. And I needed to really hone in on who the story is about. And so it was good advice. And so I changed it then to 2 point of view characters. But the beauty is, I think it was good. Nothing was wasted, I guess is the point, because I think I began to understand Eli and Mama better. You know, I knew them so well after having, you know, written their points of view. And so then I think it's a richer story when you get their points of view through Ruth in the book, because I spent that time with them.
No. I've heard of authors who write backstory on authors on their characters that they know is never going to be in the book.
Oh, interesting.
And so that they want, and so now I don't know if you have the time to do this in the future, but it's interesting that you did it sort of inadvertently. Like you wrote backstory.
Yeah,
that's and it made the book definitely richer for it.
It made it so much better, and yeah, it really did. So I'm glad I did it that way.
Yeah, because they were just really full, rounded characters. They were supporting characters, but they were solid in of themselves.
Yes, I thought so, and I think that's why, you know, because of that work I put into them. I mean, I really love creating Eli. He was really one of my favorite characters to write, even though he was such a secondary character. You know, he was just fun to write. I think writing male characters was fun. He and Midnight. I love writing both of those.
How interesting. Why do you think, what was the difference between writing male characters and female characters?
I don't know. Maybe it's just a stretch to kind of go outside of myself and my own life and my own experiences, and to try that. But it was just so much more fun, I think, writing these male characters. I don't know why it is. But people ask usually about the difficulty of writing, say, a Midnight, because, you know, I've never been a boy and I've never been white. But I usually say that I'm, in terms of the white part, you know, being Black in America, I'm somewhat fluent in whiteness, having been in white spaces, you know, my entire life in school and in other work environments. But the boy, okay, so I've never been a boy, but I've been 11 years old. And so in Midnight, I really think, and people always went, really, Midnight is the character that I feel closest to in terms of who's closest to my own life and my experience. And that's because I was bullied a lot as a kid. And so I really know what it means to really stand on the outside of things looking in. And I wrote about that experience actually in the November 2015 issue of the Oprah magazine, personal essay, about being bullied. And so I understand what it's like to be desperate for acceptance and to belong. And that's what I infused in Midnight, because that's what he was, you know, just wanting to fit in, wanting, just wanting to be accepted and to, you know, and to belong. And that's what really drove a lot of his actions in the book. I'm not like Midnight, since I've never been mischievous the way he was in the book, but those other core elements to him of what he's really seeking, I identified so closely with that.
That was the boy in him then.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I really could have seen Midnight as a protagonist in a middle grade novel.
Could you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you
Yeah.
guys can tell me what you think of this. All right, so I workshopped this book, and I'll ask you a question. I workshopped this with Tayari Jones, the author most people know of American Marriage. She's great, right? And so I workshopped it at Tin House with her in the summer of 2018, and she thought, I mean, she liked the story concept, but she said that I should just focus on Ruth and not have a woman and a child. And she said, or if you have a child, age him up like maybe a teenager, like almost an adult, because she said it's often difficult for people the gravitas is not always there when you have an adult and a child and they're as point of view characters, and that people, typically glom onto the adult and not the child, because the child's problems don't always have the weight of an adult's. And so I listened to the feedback, but I still kept it as is. And I have to say that, I mean, so many people have connected with Midnight. I mean, so many people want a sequel. They want to know what happens to Midnight next.
Well, there's no kid star in American Marriage, but there certainly is in Silver Sparrow.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Those are kids. That's interesting.
That's interesting that she gave me that feedback. Yeah, so I'm just curious what you guys think about adult and child, as point of view characters.
I heard of this book called To Kill a Mockingbird, where there's a really popular kid.
Yeah.
But I was, even before you told that story, I was going to say how much I liked River, and that having him at that pre-teen age, before there's the deeper ramifications of his choices and before sort of everything kicks in for him, it really made it strong. And their relationship then made more sense, that she would feel more motherly about him. And it brought out all the subtleties that needed to be brought out, all the things that will be easier to talk about. We can see through the relationship of Midnight.
Yeah.
I think if he'd been older, I feel like the relationship would have been different.
Yeah, it would have been a very different story.
There would have been a little, not, even if there was no sexual tension, there is still that this person's of age, and this becomes a real, like, she becomes the mother, almost like a secondary mother figure, and because he's lost his mother, and
right. And then she's trying out motherhood in a way too, trying to mother, and then he's a boy looking for a mother figure.
But he's a boy who's still also allowed to have those sort of passions, still to be curious and to be interested. And once you hit that teenage, it kind of stops. At 12 they become silent, especially the boys. So
she has two boys.
I have boys that are delightful, but they were quiet. They weren't as chatty and as willing to try new things or to admit to their loves in the same free way.
Right.
Yeah, they wanted to fit in even more than River was trying to. I mean, not River, but Midnight was trying to fit in. Yeah.
Trying to fit in. Yeah. And then there's Corey. I love the relationship between Midnight and Corey, and as well, who's a Black boy in the book. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonderful friendship. The relationships are terrific, and I feel like you really try to show all different kinds of families, family relationships in the story, and I think
there are a lot of family dynamics. Yep,
and a lot of like how people fill holes when they lose people, because there's so much loss in the story. I mean, to a certain extent, it's Ruth's grieving story. She doesn't assume, she assumes her child's alive, but she has that sort of same grief when you lose a child, but you have this opportunity to see, well, maybe I didn't.
Right. And then there's the role of characters who are not there physically, like Papa, who's her grandfather who's gone, but yet he's still present in many ways in the story and in the family. Her
mother's, Jana's also gone and still has her, or and Butch's wife. They're all, they all are there still.
They're there, even though they're not there, right? In the physical sense. Yeah, you feel them and you feel their loss and their presence. Yeah.
And there's so much vulnerability too in each of the characters and how that's handled, where it's, sometimes it's received with others as being very cared for and taken with love. And other times that vulnerability, people are preying upon it. And it's just, you realize how fragile we are as humans.
We really
and
are.
how important it is to be kind and how quick it is to take advantage without realizing we did.
That we did. That's
Yeah.
true. That's true. Yeah, that's another good theme. Expectations, I think, is another
Mhm.
one. The expectations that Mama, who really raised Ruth and Eli, that she has for her grandchildren, particularly for Ruth,
Yeah.
and what pressure that puts on someone. And I think that's also very true in the Black community too. There's this idea of somebody at my day job was also talking about this exceptionalism. Someone was telling me that another coworker had said I was exceptional, and then this woman who's also Black said, but why do we as Black people always have to be exceptional?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that Ruth was grappling with, because her grandmother, Mama, has all these expectations that she's got to be the best, she's got to be exceptional, and that
Work twice as hard for
work
half
twice
the
as hard to
credit.
get half as far. That's what
Yeah.
you grow up with, in a lot of Black households. I know in mine, that's what my parents said to me. You've always got to work twice as hard as anybody else. So, and then that's part of, what drives Ruth to leave her baby behind. And why her grandmother is pressuring her, you've got to leave this child behind, because we'll take care of things, but she's got to go to Yale and, pursue her engineering dream and not look back.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that this theme comes up, because I always think about Red in the Bone.
Oh,
which
right.
has,
I love Red at the Bone. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And it has a similar sort of dilemma that works out in different ways.
Yes.
But it's one of these things that's like, we have to do everything to get you there.
To get you there. Yes, yes. Even from in the Kindest Lie, the very beginning, I talk about the names that, Mama and Papa, the grandparents, gave Ruth and Eli. They were like, they gave them, first of all, they gave them more kind of biblical names, but then beyond that, Mama gave her grandchildren names that would get them to the interview, and so then there I'm bringing in kind of this racialized sense of how hiring managers look at names, look at resumes. And so it's like, you need to, for some of these families, like, I got to set my child up or my grandchild up for success at the start. And sometimes it starts just with what I name this child, and every family doesn't always have to think about that, but these families do.
Yeah. One of the things that's so interesting is the intricacies of the adoption, what the mystery that Ruth has to unravel. Did you wind up doing a lot of research to kind of get all that?
I did, and I didn't plan to do as much of that mystery around that adoption and some of that, like that D'Angelo, who's kind of the adoption attorney, if you in the book. Some of that, I think if I recall, I created that character. I didn't have him all along. I created that character and kind of added a little bit of that in when I started getting some feedback, from agents who were looking for a little bit more of that kind of an element in there, a little more intrigue, and make it. And also, I need to have Ruth do more work. That was really what the feedback was about. She needed to do more work to try to find her son, and that's where some of that intrigue came in. And then I work with my editor at William Morrow just on, kind of trying to make that a little more interesting, the mystery around that. But I did do research. I engaged with a woman named Tammy, I'm forgetting her last name now, but anyway, she's an adoption attorney in Indiana. And so I asked around and somebody connected me with her because I don't know anything about adoption law. And also I wanted to be very specific. Again, I didn't want to make any mistakes. So I wanted, because a lot of the laws are very specific, state by state. And so this was adoption law, is what she does in Indiana. And some of the things that I already had written, they worked so well with what she was telling me about changes in the law that were happening, at some of the pivotal moments of the story I'd written. So it all worked out really well. And I did a book club with some attorneys. Just go figure. I didn't try to find attorneys, but just so happened it was a group of women in Chicago, and they were all attorneys. And I was nervous going into that book club, going, "Oh my God." And I told them that. They were like, no, everything seemed fine. Like there was nothing, no red flag for them legally in what I, had written. But I was worried about not getting, those were the things I was more worried about probably than the snow in Chicago. I was like, I can't get the adoption law like messed up. So.
Yeah, those were some tense moments. I may have, flipped ahead a little bit to make sure it was going to work out.
It was all going to work out. I do that in books all the time. That's so funny.
Just to take the pressure off.
Sometimes I go to the very end, and then I see if the certain character is still around at the end.
And it's just the name. You just need to see the name.
I don't want to read everything that happens. I just want to know. Yeah, you weren't talking about the memory of, but That's so funny that we both do that, Lisa.
Yeah, and Belle, you wrote it this time, though.
I know, right?
Yeah, I think it's more common than people. It's funny because people freak out about spoilers, but I think half the people are like, spoil it. Let me know.
So, yeah.
Especially in something like this where there's there's some tense moments here.
There are some tense moments there, and I had multiple variations of the climax scene in the book. So things went different ways, in different iterations of it. But I think the way it works out is the right way, because I had to think about what I wanted to happen. Did I want to open a jurisprudence issue toward the end of the book? No, I was really interested in the relationships and the emotional fallout of some of the secrets being revealed in the book at the time of the climax. And so that's what was most important to me. So I kind of had to evaluate, what is it I really want out of this scene, and does it really help align with the goals I have for the book?
It's interesting when you read a book like this, and sometimes the books resolve and sometimes they don't resolve. Our book club just did yesterday a book called Transition Baby, which is also a book about adoption, and it's also a different world. I can't really say, but things don't necessarily get resolved, and it drove some people crazy.
Yes. And some readers really get upset about that. There are some people who wanted even more resolution in mine too. Yeah. I felt like to me, I don't like to tie up every loose end, and to me that's not fulfilling. But I want the ending to feel inevitable, and inevitable. And then I want the reader to imagine what happens next. But a lot of people want more. And so I guess that's why a lot of people want a sequel, which is nice. I mean, I don't have plans for a sequel, but people ask about it all the time.
They always do when they like a book. Do you like, I don't want a sequel to this. Now, one thing I always say is, if there was a character in this book, like a minor character, and you thought this person could have a book,
that's a little different. Yeah, I agree.
Who would that be in this book? Who do you think has their own story?
Oh, who could have another? I like Eli a lot. So
yeah, I think it's Eli for you.
Yeah, I like Eli.
Well, she's already written his backstory.
I know, so I could get more with him. But so on my day job, I was talking to my CEO where I work, and he loved the book, and he said he already is plotting out like another book. He's like, you've got to do a sequel. He wants to see Ruth and Xavier. I'll just give that away. He wants to see them. That's Ruth's husband. He wants to see the two of them in another book. There's a scene in there where somebody asked Xavier about getting involved in politics. And so my CEO glommed onto that and said, I want to see him in Chicago getting involved in dirty politics, Xavier. And I want to see, what happens with Ruth, and then do they have some kids, and, and just dealing with some of the ethical dilemmas that he's going to fall into. And I was like, okay.
Well, if you made Xavier the center of the novel, then you'd have
Yeah.
like a Mr. Bridge, Mrs. Bridge kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or the Fates and Furies, where that. So
So there
might
you
not
go.
be a sequel. That might be because Xavier probably has his own backstory.
Right. That would be kind of a whole totally new,
He
story.
seems perfect, but maybe.
Yeah. But I think my CEO wants him to be get a little shady, dirty him up a little bit.
That reminds, if he did some political work, we're doing a show he reads for a book called Coyotes of Carthage by Stephen Wright. If you haven't read it, I'd highly recommend.
Okay, I haven't read that.
Terrific book about a guy who's had some problems and is he's sort of like a political fixer, and it's a Black guy who has to go to a very conservative mostly white town and get them to flip an election.
Oh, this is like an Olivia Pope from Scandal.
Yeah.
He was the fixer.
Yeah. So yeah.
Oh, that's it. What's it called again? Coyotes of what now?
Carthage. I say that because it's not as crazy. There's some similarity to one of your recommendations, Razorblade Tears.
Oh, okay. I loved Razorblade Tears.
Especially, and actually, maybe even more to, I would say the connections might be more to the first one. What is the other book called?
By him, Blacktop Wasteland.
Blacktop Wasteland, yeah.
I didn't read that one, but okay.
Yeah. Funny enough, I also only read Razorblade Tears, but I did adore it.
Okay.
I'm definitely going back because Chris, who read both of them, said that he thought Blacktop Wasteland was better.
Oh, really?
Just for a moment, just let's get the whole world to read Razorblade Tears. Who hasn't?
Yeah. Let's. Did you read that one, Lisa?
And I haven't read that one.
Haven't read that one yet? Yeah.
I'll add that.
Highly recommend it.
Yeah.
It's about you want to say it? It's a two
black, two men. Yeah, it's like a black. These two middle-aged men, fathers, one black and one white, very different. Come from somewhat different worlds. But both have had some trouble with the law. But they so they have that in common at least. But they are trying to avenge the murders of their sons. Their sons were married to each other. So a gay marriage between their sons, and but both dads are homophobic, so have some questionable views. But they've so they're so different, and you would never think of these two coming together, but they do come together to, like I said, avenge the murders of their sons.
It's kind of like a contemporary take on the buddy comedies of the 80s, except if he flips the races. So the black guy is the more kind of stoic, a little more successful, and the white guy is kind of the clown, sort of.
He's the one living in the trailer park.
Yeah, the Eddie Murphy kind of.
Yeah. But there's humor. There is humor in there. Some of it is funny, but there's a lot of violence, I will say.
Right. They're pretty violent books.
It's kind of violent, but the character development was just. I mean, I still think about Ike and Buddy Lee.
Yeah, such interesting things about and really good thoughts about race and really race.
Yes, a lot about race and about.
Can tell you a little secret about Ike and Buddy Lee? So we did an event. We've done events for both his books.
Ike and Buddy Lee. I'm like,
no, for both of Sean Cody's books. And at the first one, Cody was talking to our marketing person, Chris, and Chris was talking about his dad, whose name is, by the way, Buddy Lee.
Oh.
And he said, "Ooh, that's a good name." So, do you want to talk about another? You have a few other books, or Lisa, do you want to ask another question about?
Well, let's talk about a couple of the other books that you were talking about. I was gonna, I'll bring it up after you talk about books.
Oh, okay.
Book first.
Yeah. Okay. So I had a few that I really have enjoyed. So we talked about Razorblade Tears already. That's like at the top of my list. The Family by Naomi Krupitsky is another one. Have you read that one?
About that? I don't know the book. Really.
You don't know that one? Yeah, it was a read with Jenna book club pick. here just a few months ago, maybe 3 months ago. And so it's about these two young women. It's coming of age of these two young women, and it's really both dual point of view of these women, and they're being raised in a mafia family, so that's why it's called The Family. And so they are friends. They're not related to each other. They're friends, but in the mafia world, they are, they're such a close tie. And these two, girls are friends and very close, and they grow up in that world, and then it follows them into adulthood when both of them marry and have children, and and they have moments where they consider leaving this life, but there's so much about the family that always pulls you back. And there's a really pivotal climax scene, kind of similar to my book, that's very interesting, where they have to make some choices about what they want to do in terms of staying in or getting out, and what that's going to do to the family dynamic. So it's really well done and beautifully written book.
I usually know the Read with Jenna books because she has really good taste.
Yeah,
I like her books a lot.
She does. And she did an interview with her, a Zoom thing. I get to see a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just really beautifully written. Somebody asked if we're going to be listing my recommendations, and so yeah, if you can. So
I'm going to definitely send the links to each one. So basically, the saying to folks, if you hit the link, it just opens up in another window, and you can look at it later when the program's ended.
Well, the program's right. Don't go.
And I always put both stores.
Right.
So I'm getting Family now, and then we'll do Razor Blade
Tears. Yep. And then another one on my list was Wish You Were Here by Jodi Picoult. And Jodi actually blurbed, wrote a words of praise for my book, which was wonderful. It was just like a dream come true to have her words on the cover of my hardcover book. But anyway, I really enjoyed Wish You Were Here. I didn't know how I was going to feel about that particular one because, it is a pandemic book. Some people don't want to read about the pandemic right now, but I think it was actually the perfect book for me, at least, to read during a pandemic, because it's, about this woman who goes to the was it the Galapagos?
It was the Galapagos,
Galapagos
Islands.
Both read it. So. Yes, the Galapagos Islands. And during the pandemic, she has a boyfriend who is a doctor, who's in the emergency room treating patients. But it's not your typical book. I can't say a lot. It's one of those where you have to be careful because there's a really major twist in the book. And I know you guys had her, Daniel. Didn't you have her? You had.
We almost saw you at it.
You almost saw me there. That's right. I was going to come to that, and I bought a ticket for it, but I couldn't.
Oh no!
Oh, but there's because of a work thing that kept me late. But it's a major twist in the book. But it's really kind of about finding yourself, and I felt like I really did a lot of soul searching in reading the book about what's important to me, what life is really about, what matters to me. And it was a book that really made me think and feel.
I think a lot of readers felt the same way. I mean, I've heard that from so many people say that, and they were so surprised by it as well.
I was really surprised by it. It wasn't, so it's not what you may be expecting from a pandemic book.
I just want to say, I've now read 3 COVID novels, and I've liked all of them.
Did you really like them all?
And I think maybe now we have a little bit of, at least for a month
we think we've got some distance now.
Maybe. But
Don't say it.
This idea that we were all, first of all, it's not a 2-month thing. I think publishing originally thought we're just going to be able to avoid this.
Yeah.
But obviously 2 years is too long to avoid, and maybe longer.
Right. Well, that makes me think about COVID. So what do you guys think about what should authors do about talking about COVID or addressing COVID in their novels? Like if you're writing a book now and it's set 2020 to now, what do you do?
Well, I heard a famous author who I won't mention because it's all hearsay, but they had set their book in they did it backwards, and they set their book in 2018 to avoid it.
To avoid it.
And I will tell you that a lot of authors set their books before around whatever 95 or so, like they want to get out of the way of the internet. They want
The
to get out
internet,
of the way of
yes,
cell phones.
yes. Cell phones, right, because that would have solved everything if you'd made a phone call, you know, a cell phone.
Now, I've now read a lot of books that actually do some really good things with cell phones and internet stuff.
Yeah.
I had to read some novels like that were like all text, and I was like, I don't like this. But I don't, you know, I guess I
Yeah, I'm
don't.
not
But
a big
anyway,
fan of all
so
text.
then she had another part of the book that was going to be set after COVID, and she's like, oh, then she's like, oh, it wasn't after COVID after all. So it's going to be tough. I think people, you know, the way for a while, it just seemed like every book had to hit on 9/11. It's another book, another moment in time that it was just very difficult to work around. And I think we will, you know, and I think it'll be okay.
Yeah.
If your
And we'll
next book,
figure it out.
yeah,
You know, it's
your next book will be fine.
Well, yeah, my next book is actually set way before, so I don't have to worry about it. It's 1960 and 1992. So I'm not having to, you know, worry about, but I didn't do that intentionally, you know. Had nothing to
No,
do
of
with
course not.
COVID. Now I know you're like, wink, wink, right?
Yeah.
No, I really didn't. Because I think if I set a book during that time, I would want to somehow address it in some way. I kind of feel like this time period, even following now, I feel like it may change the way we connect with each other. So not just about whether your people are wearing masks or not, or you're checking vaccination status, if you're going, you know, on a date with somebody, oh, are you, you know, but just the way we connect. I think it's really changing that. And this feeling of this isolation that we've all been experienced for so long. And because I'm so interested in writing about relationships, characters, I feel like that would impact relationships that we have.
This is a time for story collecting, when you need to collect all the bits and pieces and the little snippets.
Yeah.
Do you have a pad?
Yeah.
Do you have a pad, or do you write on your phone, like when you see, like, oh, that's going in a book?
Oh, I don't. I should do that. I don't. I usually just forget everything. That's the way when I was writing The Kindest Lie, I was like, I would get the best ideas when I'd be on my driving commute to work. I have a long commute and I drive, and I'd be like, oh, I'll remember when I get to work. And of course I would forget. So I started using my cell phone, the voice memo function, and talking to that. So that's something I still do when I get ideas for things. I talk into my phone. If I'm out somewhere where I can't write it in a notebook, I just talk into the phone. And that helps.
Because I think so many of like Mama's stories in The Kindest Lie and just the reminiscing that was going on, that's what we collect now for a story about COVID later.
Yeah.
And that's how you build it in, is just through all our little stories, because you added such texture and such richness through the memories.
Yes, yes. Yep. Through memories, through backstory.
Yeah.
Caroline Levitt, who's been kind of like a literary fairy godmother to me, the author, Caroline
And
Levitt.
many other authors,
wonderful.
too many other authors too.
Yeah, she's so wonderful. But I was blown away. She told me that she and another author were studying my book for backstory, like, you know, just technique and backstory. I'm like, what? Because I had studied her book, Cruel Beautiful World, for backstory. Like, what are you talking about? You know, I think she does backstory really well. So I learned from her, and now she's looking at my work for backstory.
Oh, that's really cool.
That was really cool. Yeah, when those moments happen. Yeah.
Well, you had one more book on your official list.
Oh yes, I did have one
1619
more on the 1619. I actually have this one near me. I'm still reading this one. This is a big one, but
it is a very dense book.
Yeah, but it's so good. So this is my one nonfiction recommendation, the 1619 Project, edited by Nicole Hannah Jones. And so it is really about the real origins of this country in terms of slavery and the role of African Americans and the building of this country. But the thing is, it's history, but it's such beautiful storytelling. And throughout it, she talks about so many things that connect, things that happen, you know, with the founding of our country and slavery, but she connects it with the things that are going on today. Like she talks about George Floyd and Donald Trump and all the everything that's happening today. And you see all the parallels, you know, between how things started and the roots of white supremacy and where that is today.
So if somebody was, say, in a bookstore, maybe one of ours, and you said, dip into, just try, you know, like open it up to this particular story, like what would be one of the essays that you thought was most, that might, what was your favorite essay so far?
Yeah, she has different themes for each chapter. And so there's one that I'm still early in the book because I'm reading it for a work book club that we're doing
Okay.
at my job. But so there's one that we just read about fear. I think that's a chapter on fear. That's chapter 4.
Okay.
On fear, I think is a good one. To read. And it's a lot about, she talks about like slave rebellions and just the slave patrols that started out, and then how the modern police force in many ways is based upon those slave patrols and this fear and this need to really control a group of people, and and then some of the movements, the uprisings over the years. Right. She goes through that. I just think it's just beautiful because that's a chapter where she connects so much of what happened before to where we are today, and bringing it up to the marches and all the different kinds of people who came together in 2020 to march in the summer after the murder of George Floyd, and how that gives her hope,
Yes, it is called a heart, in a very different way, sort of harkens back to your 2008 moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lisa had a question about the music in the book, so we wanted to. I did want to ask you.
I had a couple because we were talking about just the backstory, but you pull in so much music, and maybe it's always on my mind. But what were some of your favorite musical moments? And, did you know you were going to bring that in, or is it just always part of your life that you couldn't imagine not having it there?
Yeah. And it's so funny. I can't even remember the songs now that you know particular ones, but I love music, but I just, what is that? I can't even read.
It's Erykah Badu.
Oh, Erykah Badu. Yes.
I was like, I
think that was one of the songs from her that Ruth was
on and on
was listening to.
She
there
said
was
it was
one where she was listening while she was giving birth. There was also one that she listened to, and I'm trying to think of which song that was, but that was probably my favorite one, just because I think it was a moment where her brother was trying to, help her and calm her down as she was giving birth, and she's listening to one of her favorite songs. But the problem is, so there's like a story behind that. So with using music in books, you guys know that it can create an issue. So
you can do the title, but not the lyrics.
Title, you can't use the lyrics, right? So can't use the lyrics. But where I ran into trouble was whichever song it was by Erykah Badu that I have her listening to as she's giving birth at home. This was a home birth for Ruth as a teenager. That song, I had this scene set in, I think is August of 1997 when she's giving birth. And I had a different song though than the one you see in the book now, but it was another song by her. And my copy editor said, you can't do that because the song wasn't out yet. And I was like, oh, no, I researched. This came out in 1997. The song came out in October of 97. And this home birth was in August. So it hadn't come out yet at the time that I've got Ruth listening to the song.
She didn't catch the snowstorm.
I know, right? She didn't catch the snowstorm after all of that. But those were the kinds of things that they catch. So that was a music one. And then I have Ruth and her best friend, Natasha, playing a hand clapping game to Rockin' Robin. And so that one, I couldn't use, I had the actual Rockin' Robin lyrics. So that was one where I couldn't use that because of copyright or something. Yeah, I couldn't use those lyrics, but I remembered that as a child, we changed the words to the song, but it was to that, to that, melody. And so we use that. So those are the lyrics that I have in there in this one scene. And they're doing kind of a different version on that. Like Mama's in the kitchen burning that. Was it Mama's in the kitchen burning rice? Daddy's on the corner shooting dice. Something like that. Yeah. So I like, something we used to like play a little hand clapping game.
Right, Don't your hands just burn when you think about doing that?
I know, right?
Yeah. All the time.
You do that as a kid?
Always.
I love that.
Constantly.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, that was a big summer camp thing.
And then this. And this like.
Yep.
I would look on the other kids doing it in awe. I was
Yeah.
too.
I know.
Yeah.
I was really, a very shy kid. Like I have jumping double dutch, I think, in the book too. And I never was, confident enough to jump in and be the kid out there playing some of those games. But that's the beauty of writing a book. You can have your characters act out things that maybe you didn't do or didn't have the courage to do.
Lisa, you have a last question?
Well, do I have a last question? We did books. How about a quick one along the line with music? You've got so much food in there.
Oh, yeah.
What was one of your favorite childhood foods?
Oh, favorite childhood foods.
Or did you bring those in?
Yeah, I don't think I put this in there, but I love meatloaf as a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, like my mother was always like, "That's such a poor man's food,"
No,
but
with ketchup on it, with ketchup
on it.
Yeah.
And I love my mother's meatloaf, and so she still makes that for me. Like when I want a special meal, even though it's not like a steak dinner, but it's it reminds me of home and and my mother, and it just makes me feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to have that in the book, Ruth going home and with her grandmother and, cooking some of the foods, the fried chicken, the things that she grew up with. And yeah, there's just something about that. So food plays a major role in this book. It's just really the center of family life in the book.
And neighbors too, and friendships.
Friendships,
yes. Yeah.
Friendship, family.
So much is.
All of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to just, I've been told to put the link to purchase the book again at the end, just like at the beginning, because it turns out if you join late, you don't get it.
Yeah.
And let's see if I did this. No, I didn't do it. Here's one more question so I can get this right, Lisa.
What about what I'm working on?
About food.
Yes, tell us more about that historical novel.
Yes. So my next book is called, the working title is People of Means. I think it might stick. But it's my foray into historical. It's a dual timeline. And so it's about an upper middle class Black mother and daughter, both of them coming of age at different moments of racial reckoning in the country. So the mother is coming of age in 1960 in Nashville, Tennessee, as a student at Fisk University at the time of the sit-ins. And then her daughter coming of age in 1992 in Chicago, but heavily influenced by the events in LA with the acquittal of the 4 white officers and the beating of Rodney King. And so they're upper middle class. So there's this whole idea of what does resistance mean? So I'm looking at resistance a lot, and for a lot of these families, your parents told you that the way you resist is about just being excellent. That's how you resist any, obstacles you may face that are racial or otherwise, is just by being the best you can be. So they're coming of age at times when families are telling them that, but they're so influenced by the world around them where people are engaged in, these movements, for civil rights. And so how are they going to respond to that? So it's resistance, it's purpose. I have some love stories in there. And again, dealing with race and class. So I think readers who really connected with those themes in The Kindest Lie will enjoy People of Means as well.
Does it have a scheduled date?
There's no scheduled date yet. No, I'm still writing it. It's due to my editor first week in May. And so we're hoping it'll come out around May, around that time frame of 2023.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited.
I know, I'm excited too. So and I interviewed Nikki Giovanni to get some backstory for it, because she graduated from Fisk University around that time. And so she gave me a lot of great insights and some things that happened in history that she said, you're not going to find that in the history books or on Google. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So that was fun.
Oh, that would be great. I can't wait.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thanks, you guys, for supporting me in the book. I just appreciate it so much.
Well, continued success to you. We are thrilled and honored that we got to talk to you.
Yes, and I hope to come there and see you guys in person.
One day. One day.
I believe it's going to happen. I mean, I'm close.
No, it could have happened. No, it could have happened. It almost could have happened for this if things had come together.
If things had come together, yeah.
This was wonderful.
Yeah, my next book we do it in person.
Okay.
Okay.
And keep
Um,
writing and enjoy the research.
I will. I will. Thank you. And thanks to
Thanks,
everybody
Nancy.
for coming out. And I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.